Hi, I'm Doyle.
And I'm Jordan, and I got something to say. Actually got a few things to say this episode. I want to talk about some news stories related to the pandemic situation, and sort of society and the economy and just humans. Really, let's be. I want to be as direct as possible with the reason why I want to talk about these things. The human aspect of the situation we find ourselves in, the things we're trying to do to get through it, to make sure life can go on, to make sure everyone's okay. But it's a couple of news stories that have come up, and they came up, I guess, originally. Both of these are a week or two old, as of the recording of this podcast, which is May 7th, 2020. And the reason why I want to wait a little while for them to talk about them is to let them develop a little bit, to get some secondary and even tertiary potentially action on them, so that we can have maybe a little bit more of a complete view to kind of talk about how it unfolded, what our opinions are on these situations, and just generally what that means in a broader sense, not only for us specifically in this situation, but just generally as humans. And I mean, human interaction is one of the most important things in the world. It keeps the world going, right? So all of these sorts of specific incidents have meaning and have impact on that kind of human interaction. So the first one that I want to talk about, I think, happened first earlier in the timeline, and that would be in Texas. And this was in Dallas, actually. And in fact, I want to add to it. There's a couple cases like this in Texas, but the one I want to speak about is that there's a lady in Texas, in Dallas, that she had a salon, and she posted on Facebook that she wasn't going to be shutting down because she had to be able to make money to support her family, and for her the stylists or whomever worked for her employees to be able to work to make money for their family as well. They wanted to take sensible precautions to run their business, but they still wanted to run their business because they don't want to be out on the street. They want to be able to, support themselves, support their family. And what ended up happening is she got arrested and charged with, I don't know what. Really, what can you charge someone who's just running business for, right? These are
Mm-hmm.
claimed to be in violation of particular orders from the government for sheltering in place, only essential businesses, quote unquote essential businesses, being open. And it's really strange, like how do you book a crime against something that's actually not a law? So there's been some unfolding after this fact of it happening too, that I want to talk about. But maybe before we get into that, have you've heard about this, right, Doyle?
Sure.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, kind of tagging on to what you were saying about these orders. There, I think technically there would be considered executive orders,
Sure.
and I'm not certain that the executive orders have the full force of law, but they're acting like they are, right? But in some states, I've actually read several of the executive orders coming from the governors, and they are strong recommendations, suggestions, and there are some requirements, but by and large, they're worded in such a loose way that there are lawyers probably that wouldn't be able to discern and divide the
Sure.
word clearly enough to give a total understanding for the layperson, and certainly the layperson, someone running a business that can't divine the law, the wording of the language and laws, or executive orders for that matter. But yeah, this is one where I think there's a particular concern in my mind about the both sides of the equation, right? I mean, the right of the state to provide some protection for the citizens, but then also the individual rights, and that's getting into historical liberty territory, in my estimation,
Sure.
that I think is pretty powerful, pretty important. quite frankly.
I definitely agree with you. And the part about this that I guess irks me the most is that you mentioned the right of the state to protect citizens, and putting aside whether that
Maybe I should
is
have said responsibility rather than right.
okay, but
Yeah.
even putting it aside that as a responsibility of the state or not, that's immaterial. I think
Mhm.
to the point that I'm about to make or want to make, which is they are the executive order applied in this particular scenario is being enforced to protect a third party that is neither of the parties involved in this business transaction. Right? So
Sure.
that's being enforced not to protect the person selling, not to protect the person buying, and not to protect the public in the area of where the buying and selling is happening. It is only to protect the theoretical, not even we don't even know for sure, the theoretical other people that those engaged in that transaction might come in contact with, if it so happens that one of the parties involved in that transaction has this virus, and that not only that they have it, that they are able to transmit it to somebody else, and that the person that they transmit it to has any negative ramifications of contracting the virus, because we know that many people, maybe even a majority of people who contract the virus have no negative ramifications of it, or no negative ramifications that wouldn't be mistaken for cold or in some worse scenarios, the flu.
Sure.
So you're talking about leaping multiple levels to get to a point where you can even construct an argument that the state's trying to protect anybody in that situation. And in fact, you can say that, and this is the point I think that the proprietor is trying to make in her stance, is you're actively causing harm to other people by doing that, because you're preventing a human from being able to provide for them and their own, and that's problematic. Like at that point, you're starting to say we can command when the economy works and when it doesn't. We can regulate trade without limit. We can, reach into all these other half dozen parts of life, because if you're regulating trade and you're regulating voluntary interaction like that, then there is literally no difference between regulating that and regulating lots of other voluntary things like marriage. I mean, any kind of human interaction, right? It's
Sure.
abstractable to any kind of human interaction. So that's very
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah. I mean, and to respond to one of the things you mentioned about true injury or harm to the proprietors, the people that are trying to operate their business, that is an absolute known harm,
Yeah.
injury, versus the potential risk. And to your point, not even an absolutely known risk, but a potential risk that could be realized. And it sort of concerns me about individual liberty, from the standpoint of the person, right? And I use a little euphemism or some sort of an old saying I picked up from somewhere. I heard someone say it. My right to throw a punch ends at the end of your nose, right? And the thought being, I can do anything I want to as long as it doesn't harm you. And I think what we're seeing is the government not taking that part of the responsibility of protection as clearly as I think they should. Not anti-government. I'm not saying that. So I'm not. That's not the point here. But it's more a point of the reaction to this pandemic that we're all experiencing and facing, and how people are so emotional about the reaction and the response that it isn't measured or balanced in such a fashion to ensure that the least harm is done, or no or least harm is done for the greatest benefit, whether it be individually, whether it be societally, in a locale or a state, or even in the country. There doesn't seem to be that counter counter view. It's all about, the outcome of the pandemic and the number of infections and the number of deaths, and certainly not wanting to minimize or say that doesn't matter, that's not important. It's absolutely important. But when you look at it in a greater sense, we do that every day. We do that every year.
Yeah.
This nation, this country does, and our locales do, right? The whole thing about all these other diseases that people encounter, that we live with year in and year out. The tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands of people that suffer and die from the diseases that are part of our natural norm. It's sort of a given. We see it day in and day out.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where no matter what you're talking about from a risk perspective, if you take a myopic view to try to completely eliminate one risk that you're exposing yourself to, then you're just going to be extra susceptible to the other risks that you're normally more prepared for, and that's exactly what's happening here. It's really really strange. Like, it's almost like a lot of these organizations and governments are acting like the only way you can die right now is if you die of this virus. Like, there's no other way to die right now, or no other way to get sick, or no other way for you to have your life impaired. And it's like, that's it couldn't be further from the truth. Again, to your point, not that this isn't a serious situation. That's not what we're trying to say. But there are other serious situations in the world too. We can't ignore those.
Right. So let me ask you a question, because this is a question I struggle with, and I know there are lots of perspectives and points of view on this. Why do people, the decision makers, the policy makers, the bureaucrats, the politicians, the governmental leaders, and what all, why do they take such a strong stance on this in this particular case? What do you think about that? Why is this so different than other scenarios? What is it about this? Is there some logical aspect to it that says, oh, we must take this hard stance because of this circumstance or this factor?
So there's a lot of, I think, human psychology that plays into it. I think there's multiple answers to your question. I don't think there's any one thing that's the answer to it. I think that there is a general human need that when presented with a crisis, somebody thinks that they need to act immediately and decisively to address the situation. And trying to be proactive about addressing the situation. And I think in some ways that's respectable, right? Because sometimes that's what you need, right? When somebody has been shot, you need to go and put pressure on that wound. You need to react immediately. That's just clear. You got to do that. But it's clear you got to do that because you know what the result of somebody being shot means, right? You know about blood loss. You know about this, that, and the other. Or somebody being cut, you want to really, cinch it up. It's like, all those things because it's something you've experienced before. The thing is, we've not experienced anything like this before. So the action of doing something now is usually, when you don't know what's going on, at best a coin flip, right? I mean, you're gonna, maybe you luck out and yeah, that's helpful. Or maybe you make it worse. The problem is, and I think this is why we see that there's this kind of pervasive approach at doing something, because there is a rudimentary understanding of. I can't say, I have to be direct. When I say rudimentary, I mean there's like an elementary school understanding of health and of epidemiology and stuff like that sure. Is pervasive in the population, because most of us have only had a general type of education, and so the action that's going to be taken, whether in this situation or any situation, right, is usually going to be, if it's a imminently critical situation and somebody thinks they need to take action immediately, they're likely going to take action that would in some way rationally address the very elementary type of understanding of the situation at hand.
Hmm.
Because then when on the backside, if things were, not too bad, they can pat themselves on the back and say, "Yep, look, it worked." Or if it gets bad. Then they have, and this is why I take any action at all at the beginning. They have the opposite argument. Well, it would have been way worse if we'd not done this. It's like, no, you don't know that, right? Either way, you don't know that. So, I think that's one of the reasons. I think another reason is that people would, and I think this is more slightly maybe more generous assessment. I think people would generally rather be lambasted for quote unquote sins of commission than sins of omission. So actually doing something to try to address the problem than trying to take like a laissez-faire, well, just let's see what happens approach. The problem is, and it's kind of funny that I say laissez-faire, because this is, you can see this very clearly in the economy, just generally, not right now, but I mean just throughout history, that when somebody does get involved with the economy, things don't really get better. It makes things worse generally, and that's and this is one of the things that I had a YouTube video recently that I spoke about, that the economy is human action. That's all the economy is. And so just because we trade money, like you give me goods and I give you money for something, and then there's some transaction there, that's an economic activity. But me going to an art gallery is an economic activity, regardless of me paying money to get in. Let's just say I get in for free, and it's not like state sponsored or anything. It's just complete gratis, right? The artist sets up a bunch of art and says, "Hey, come look at my stuff." Me going to that is also an economic activity, because I'm trading my time for the ability to see this artist's art, right? And so any kind of action, human action, and especially human interaction, is economic activity. So a situation like we find ourselves in, getting involved in it like that, it's an economic activity, right? That influence is going to prevent some timelines, let's say, from happening, because it's blocking certain action, right? And it's going to promote other timelines to happen, because it's incenting other action to happen. And so more action is going to happen in the way, the timeline that gets incented. And so the outcome of there is going to be whatever it is. It could be good, it could be bad, and it's always going to be justified, right? It says this happened. It's going to be tried to be justified in the most positive sense possible, because these are the people who are in power, and so they're going to make these declarations that, either because I made this decision and put us on this timeline, it's good, or it stopped it from being worse because the other timeline's worse. You just never know, because you don't know the alternative. So it's an economic. It's, in my mind, this is how I conceptualize all stuff like this. It is these actors, government here, let's say governors, putting their hand into the economy and messing around with it, and using economy in that broader sense, and not just the monetary transactions.
Sure. Kind of tying some of the earlier points about the Texas hairdresser or hair place that the lady was, didn't intend to shut it down after the stay-at-home order. And you mentioned about we know what to do, or we at least have an idea of when someone is shot. You want an immediate action to stabilize, right? That's not how you heal. That's not how you heal that individual.
To stop from dying.
If that's the only thing you do, at some point in time, that person will likely expire if they were
Correct.
if it was a fatal wound, type of a wound.
Sure.
And I think the way I rationalize in my own mind, people trying to exercise some basic rights, in my estimation, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And happiness could be the pursuit of your life and sustenance.
What's liberty even?
Right.
And life.
Well, what is it? Yeah.
That's liberty, and it's life.
Yeah. That is there not some right? And I use that word kind of in an awkward way, because I don't want it to be confused with the Constitution. Although I think the Constitution would support my answer to this question. Isn't there some right that the individual has to make a decision about their own being, as long as it doesn't have a direct impact on someone else.
Well, I mean, this is the natural rights question, right? Do natural rights exist? I don't think you can make an argument that natural rights don't exist. Like, forget the Constitution, put the Constitution aside.
Right.
The whole idea of the Constitution is that it enshrines the natural rights that already exist.
That's right. That's right. It didn't create them. It acknowledged them.
Right, and this is something that I want to talk about at some point in more depth. This is a particular point for me. You know, I am a huge supporter of the Second Amendment, at least insofar as what it's intended to protect. There's very little of the Constitution that I think is objectionable. Maybe some of the later amendments we can talk about. But the whole idea, I do have a problem with a lot of guns rights people. I think the spirit of what they're trying to do is very good, but I think the semantics of how they're going about it is problematic, because they often take a position that's similar to saying the Second Amendment grants us the right to bear arms, and that is completely untrue. It is so untrue that if you take that position, you've already lost the guns rights argument, because you have the right to bear arms. Because if you even read the Second Amendment, it says, being necessary to the security of a free people or whatever, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say they have the right to bear arms. It says they have it says it already exists, and because of all these other reasons, that right that already exists should never be infringed.
Right.
And all of the basically all of the Bill of Rights is written that way, and that's one of the reasons that I have problems with some of the later amendments. Is they lose that basis in natural rights, necessarily so because they're not based in natural rights, and that's where and I understand. Well, I don't want to get into strict or loose constructionism on the Constitution, but it's a different story for a different time. But my point being that,
but it's not too far. It's not too far from some of the points that we're bringing up here tonight.
Sure,
right? Some of the things are very connected to that. I'm not saying this is when we should go down that path of discussion on the Constitution and perspectives, but they are connected. That I think that's a really important point from my perspective, is that the points that we're making, they are absolutely connected to number one, our Constitution, which, as you well said, doesn't create the rights that we have. It acknowledges the rights and seeks to protect the rights, the natural rights that we have, because I think it says certain rights, inalienable rights, are endowed upon us by our Creator, right? And that's sort of, I think, is sort of the foundation. Nevertheless, go ahead with what you're saying. I'm sorry, I kind of derailed there.
Well, you're also starting to hit on the points of why I don't think the Constitution is a great document. And I know that's a controversial statement, but
here come the arrows now. I hear.
Yeah, I know. Right? It's like I've got strong opinions on that. I think the intention of a lot of the Constitution is very sound, and I think the reason it exists is sound. But anyway, we can talk about that at a different time. But bringing this back to the whole
the First Amendment allows you to say what you just said, though.
No, it doesn't. No, that's my point. That's exactly my point.
It protects your right to say it.
Exactly. I have the right to say it regardless of what that paper says.
Point. I actually said that, and then I went ahead and refuted what I just said. But yes, it certainly protects your right to say that. Correct.
It's intended to protect. That's my real beef with the Constitution, is it doesn't protect. Right? Clearly, it doesn't protect. So it is a. Anyway, we need to do an episode just about the Constitution. We'll be here for 4 hours with me rambling on about it. But one last thing before we pivot, focusing more back on this situation in Texas about the Constitution. A lot of people will take in this situation the 10th Amendment, States' Rights Amendment, right? Any not heretofore whatever are delegated to the states, right? But the reality of it is that the states have no right to regulate who can be in business and who can't be in business. And again, that's a somewhat controversial statement because licensing laws, this, that, and the other. We could talk about that at another time. But I think that there's no right of the states to regulate who can be in business, who can't be in business. Regardless of that, that's kind of the basis for our idea here is that this lady's trying to live like it even if you can make the argument, oh well, she didn't really need it. It doesn't matter. You're not the one to sit in judgment of whether she needs it or not, right? Or are you some communistic council to declare who? No, that doesn't make any sense. But there have been developments here. So, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Dole, but she actually went to trial with this, and the judge gave her an opportunity to renounce her actions before sentencing. And she didn't, and again, here comes my opinion more, but respect to her, she stood up and said, maybe some people would couch this as a little farcical, but I don't think so. That, Judge, I respect this court, but I will not comply. She didn't say will not comply, but she said, I won't follow with this order because because the judge, lambasted her saying, that, selfish, this, whatever, the other. And she said, I have to disagree with your claim of it being selfish because I was doing this so that I could feed my children and so that my employees could feed their families as well. And I don't count that as selfish. And so it's like, good on you for going on record, just
Absolutely.
Going at the system, so to speak.
What part of the law gives the judge the authority to
we're getting there.
Someone about selfish?
Yeah, we're getting. I know exactly. We're getting there, which is interesting. So she got sentenced to 7 days in jail and $7,000 fine. And so it turns out that the governor of Texas and the attorney general of Texas basically immediately called for her release because, like, you can't do this. Like, even under executive order, you can't do this. So the good thing is that proclamation, particularly from the governor, is a good indication that the executive orders are relatively toothless, and however much this judge wants them to not be. And also, I did read earlier this evening before we got started here that the United States Attorney General, Barr, advised all of the AGs of the states that to be vigilant for any kind of breach of constitutional rights, because overstepping judges, overstepping mayors, overstepping, all these other politicians.
So who stood in prosecution of this lady in that court?
The city of Dallas.
Okay, so it was the local prosecutor that really didn't have to, the politician prosecutor, the elected prosecutor that didn't have to answer did not have to answer except for to the voters per se.
Right, and has an incentive to collude with the judges of the circuit.
Absolutely.
So anyway, not to say that they did collude, but I mean they just do because they need to form good relationships so that they can do things like speedy trial for plea bargains, etc. Anyway,
and get search warrants and things such as that.
Yeah.
That push the lines of reasonableness and maybe sometimes exceed those lines of reasonableness.
Well, we don't. Let's be fair. We don't know that happens in Dallas because I don't have any.
Absolutely, no.
But we know that has happened in some jurisdictions.
I'm sorry. Did not mean to disparage that particular prosecutor. Just speaking in a general sense, right?
Right. Well, I mean,
having had a few years work experience in the criminal justice system, I know, and we've seen all the cop shows on TV, how the back office deals. I know it's all made up, but it's made up based on some sense of reality, despite the fact that they always say the facts in this case are not based on any particular recent event.
Well, we know that warrants are procured through extremely thin circumstances and claims and whatnot.
Right.
Just look at this. We have to do a whole podcast on this. The Duncan Lemp situation. Do you know who Duncan Lemp is?
I do not know Duncan Lemp.
His name was Duncan Lemp. Anyway, that's just the thing. we need to talk about him. It's like a thing going around on the internet. It's like, we won't forget who he is. He is Duncan Lamb. Um, a really really bad situation there. But we won't talk about that now. We need to go in on that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, you and me.
Okay. So the governor and the AG, the state attorney general in Texas, intervened.
Yes. Well, they didn't intervene. They called for her to be released. And I believe I did not read this in an article or with any real source, but I saw a claim that the Texas Supreme Court overturned the case. And
Okay, because I was
hope
going to
that's
ask,
the case.
you and me both, because I was going to ask, what public good would it serve for her to spend 7 days in jail and pay a $7,000 fine in light of what she was trying to accomplish?
This is also one of the same jurisdictions where they let out people who are convicted of crimes early because of the virus situation.
Irony upon ironies, right?
I know, yeah. Right? Exactly. Let's let out the people who are actually criminals and put into jail the people who aren't criminals. Right. That makes total sense, right?
Yeah. Well, good. Maybe good. Maybe this is sometimes, and let me just say that my original college degree was in criminal justice, and so I studied some things that I never used. Studied a lot of things that I did use throughout my professional career, but one of the things that I studied was the whole idea behind civil disobedience.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And a lot of people misunderstand civil disobedience. This lady, I'm not saying she did civil disobedience. I think she was looking, in my estimation, based on what little bit I know, at pure exercising of her rights and livelihood.
Civil disobedience requires a law to be disobedient against. I think she just did the right rational thing.
Right, and the whole thing, it's a civil disobedience is a law that exists, but it's knowingly doing so, willingly accepting the punishment to make a point about either the unreasonableness, the unfairness, or the inappropriateness, or whatever the case may be. And this is, sometimes it takes either an intentional civil disobedience or a substitutionary civil disobedience, which is what maybe she could be thought to have done.
She certainly acted in a civilly disobedient, quote unquote, way.
Sure. Yeah, in a way with with good intentions, right? She was not obviously not out to try to harm anybody.
No.
Right? I mean, I don't think that the prosecutor, the judge, or anyone could have said, "Oh, you were trying to harm someone." Well, again, I want to tie this back to this gunshot wound where, someone responds to that with the way they think it needs to be dealt with right then, but then you've got to respond differently shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
I think what she was doing was responding shortly thereafter. Right.
Yeah. Definitely, and I think one of the things that you mentioned before, this is the last thing that I want to speak about on this topic before we go to the next one, is, I think you said something about how is it that judge's place to reprimand her, basically, and that's a real problem that I think in this situation, that is the worst part of it. Not that she got arrested, that's really bad. Not that she had to go through trial, that's really bad. The worst part of it is that this judge, who is supposed to be exercising actual jurisprudence, sits up there and is effectively acting as an activist for his position.
Absolutely.
That is unacceptable and behavior completely unbecoming of a judge. He needs to be removed from his position after that, if you ask me.
Sure. Well, I think there is an angle where I think it can make sense to advocate, and that's on the other side of it. When you're trying to direct, mentor, guide, influence people out of a criminal situation or a life of crime toward a more productive, law-abiding existence. Right? I
Sure.
mean, because and
That
to
requires
me
a
that's
crime to have been done.
pardon.
That requires a crime to have been done.
Absolutely, but my point being is that's the opposite end of that activism, right? It's more with the outcome of the greater good of that individual. There's
We,
no way that
but
judge, that when he was chastising this woman, that his intent was her greater good. It wasn't.
it was a
It
scare
was
tactic. That's
it
all
was
it
a scare
was.
tactic. It was his own feel good in public. Hey, look, see what I
Sure.
did.
Oh
I
yeah.
chastised her, and so I stood up strong for this situation. Right, pandering, and I'll say use the word pandering to
Yeah.
those that heard him, because he knew he was being watched. Right, there's no
Of
question that
course.
he knew that was going to be followed by the media and what also. Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's one that. I knew judges. I used to work for a judge. Some wonderful, wonderful people, but sometimes they get not any of the ones that I knew and worked with, but they can get a little too drunk on their own power.
Well, I think the real problem that I have with the entire proceeding is that I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the judge. And if this case comes before me, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see what the claim is that she has violated, right? What
Mm-hmm.
has she violated? Oh, this is an executive order. Okay, what is the basis for this executive order? Okay, here's the code in Texas state law that says that the governor or whoever issued this order can issue this order. Okay, um, is this order, does this order, one, literally outright prohibit the activity that she was engaging in, or does it recommend? A lot of these things
Mm-hmm.
are verbiage as recommend.
Sure.
If it's recommend, then the only thing that I can do is I can advocate for the recommendation of the executive order and use my position as a judge to make that statement, because you can then, because you're
Mm-hmm.
literally interpreting what's on the books, and
Right.
you're speaking to what's on the books. So that would be totally fine if he patted her wrist or whatever, saying, "Look, ma'am, you really shouldn't be doing this. There's a reason that the governor issued these orders." I don't agree with it, but if I were in that position, I would probably go against the governor or whoever made that proclamation. But even aside from that, even if he did agree with it, which clearly he did, I think he should be well within his uh uh that jurisprudence to be able to make that statement, although he couldn't enforce anything. I think that he would have to let her go, and just with that kind of a warning.
Sure.
If there is some basis in law for it, then in this sort of situation, more than he normally would, he needs to look to see if there is any relevant case law that or precedent to
Mm-hmm.
lean on. In Texas state law. If not, and even if there is, really, he needs to look at constitutional law as well, because this is fundamental rights we're talking about. This isn't like jaywalking down the street in downtown Dallas, right?
Right.
We're talking about fundamental human rights. And it's very clear he did none of that. None of that. And he just
Mm-hmm.
got up there. He had his opinion and his interpretation, and he gave it to her. The reason why that's a problem, and I'm going to call this out specifically, and this literally is the last thing I'm going to say about it. We cannot allow that behavior to happen with our judges, because then they're going to begin to be able to collude directly with the executive branches of their own state governments, and they will cut out legislatures, and they will completely kill any idea of checks and balances that we have in this country. And as much as, I have some beef with the systems that we do have in place, there's reasons the systems are in place, and they become a farce if we don't hold them to the account that they say they should be held to.
Sure. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
All right. I
So,
said a lot about that one.
time to catch your breath.
Yeah.
I think we had a lot to say about that topic. That's for sure.
Yeah, no
Um,
doubt. So you have time to move on to our next topic?
there's a little time. Sure.
All right, so the other topic, and maybe we won't go so deep in this one, although I feel similarly fervently about it. In the city of Jackson, Mississippi, the mayor there, this was early last week, I think, something along those lines. I need to start putting dates on my stories so that we can get that accurate. But sometime early last week, I think the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, issued an executive order to suspend open carry law whatever. And this is really funny. That's, I think, the way he phrased it, to suspend open carry law in Jackson. And he gave reasons for it, terrible reasons. Children that had been killed because of at least one was in the crossfire of a situation. I mean, just gut wrenching, terrible things. And nothing that I say here do I want to undermine that. But I think the conclusions that he came to and the approach that he took is not even going to address those problems or issues that he raised as the basis for his action. So the first thing that I want to call out here is just the ludicrous nature of why he says that he wanted to suspend open carry. He says that having open carry makes it harder for police officers to identify weapons which may have been illegally obtained. And that makes no sense to me at all whatsoever, because I'm pretty sure that people who've obtained weapons illegally don't open carry, right? Because his rationale is that cops can't just stop somebody and start, interrogating them, frisking them, whatever, if they see a gun. Because open carry is legal, they can't do that. So they need to be able to be unencumbered to do that, so that if somebody's open carrying, that they can basically accost that person.
So someone that is what? Oh yeah,
someone
that is, you're reacting to that, yeah.
Yeah.
Someone who is a law-abiding citizen who is openly carrying, violating no laws, now has, or at least this mayor was attempting to try to remove that right because of someone that might be doing something, right? That might have been illegally, open carrying a weapon, foolishly, if they were, a convicted felon, or the gun wasn't, obtained legally or whatever. Where if they did break a law, that would be the first thing they would, be looked into, right?
Exactly.
Do you have the right to carry? Are you a felon? Do you have a carry permit, or whatever the regulation would be locally down there? It is sad that a lot of our political leaders, and I don't really know what to call them. I don't want to be critical or negative, because a lot of our governmental leaders have good hearts, right? They have good intentions. And I have no doubt that the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi felt and believed in his heart that he had a good intention in doing what he did. But the reality of it is, they're not experts in behavior. They're not experts in constitutional law. They're not experts in a lot of things. They probably are expert in some things, or at least have much knowledge. But when they start getting into territory they shouldn't be getting into, without consulting those experts they should be consulting with, they find themselves in doing some things that are emotional based, right? And I think this was exactly one of those.
I think so. I think that it's clear on so many levels that this was completely driven by emotion. Either you can make one of two arguments. It was driven either by complete emotion or by complete desire for control. It was one of those two, right? And let's try to take the generous interpretation, then it was by emotion and not by just outright trying to grab control, which I think you can make a good argument for that too. But the reality of it is that if you allow those kinds of emotions to cause you to do similar actions to these, that only ends in one place, and that's absolute fascism. Because that's literally the definition of fascism, is that I have these beliefs that these things are good, these things are bad, and we're going to use law to enforce it. And then we're going to pick who can do this and who can do that, and then only they can do it, and the law's going, or the state's going to support that or defend their right to be the only ones to do that, or ability to be the only ones to do that. That's fascism. And we can't go down this route. It doesn't matter how good-willed you are. It doesn't matter how, much your heart yearns to do good things. And believe me, my heart yearns to do good things. I know. And I know that a lot of people have really, really pure intentions with wanting to support things like this. But path to hell's paved with good intentions. I mean, there's a reason
Sure.
that phrase exists. The other thing that I think's outlandishly silly about this executive order that the mayor signed is that there's no open carry law in Mississippi. It's a constitutional carry state. So basically, they're deriving their ability to carry openly from the Constitution. So there's literally nothing that he's suspending that he can be suspending.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
It's not exactly the same thing, but it's very similar to what Alexander Haig did when President Reagan was shot. Alexander Haig was the Secretary of State, and he didn't know what the chain of command was, and so he jumped out in front and said, "I'm in charge," when he really wasn't. The chairman pro tem of the Senate, right? Actually the vice
President pro tem.
President pro tem, in the Senate was the next in line, and but the point being, again, with good intentions, he was a general, and that's what generals do. That's what military leaders do, is they take charge, and he did with good intentions, but it was certainly not appropriate and not legal. Fortunately, there's no harm done. But it appears that the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, sort of had his own Alexander Haig moment, right?
Yeah.
I'm in charge. I'm going to do this. When you go, whoa, wait. Might have been a good idea in your head, but not when it comes out into reality, because especially when you go, hey, we're a constitutional carry state. We're not, we don't have a law that speaks specifically to that.
So the developments here are that, again, almost immediately, I think the next day, the Mississippi Attorney General wrote a nicely worded, when I say nicely worded, I mean he wasn't trying to be disparaging in any sort of way, letter to the mayor of Jackson saying basically, I suggest that you rescind your executive order, and not only do I suggest because it has no basis in constitutional law, you're attempting to violate constitutional rights of the citizens of Mississippi, but not only that, the part that you claim that the part of the code that you claim that the executive order is suspending does not actually grant open carry, and there is no open carry law in Mississippi. It's a constitutional carry state, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it was, I read the whole, it was like 2 pages. I read the letter, like I said, he was cordial, was not disparaging, was factual, and but gave a little bit of, you really should do this because this is the right thing to do for the citizens of your city. And I don't think he took any action, the mayor, that is. And the last action that I've seen on this is that the Mississippi Justice Institute, along with somebody in their government, I didn't see who, but it's I think it may be one of the state reps or something like that. Yeah, it's one of the state representatives got together with the Mississippi Justice Institute, and they're suing the mayor of Jackson. So that, I think it's good that action's being taken. The sad part is that the city of Jackson has hired an attorney to defend themselves. So they're going to waste even more taxpayer money to try to continue this debacle.
To defend a defenseless stance.
To defend something that has no basis for its claim. It's so ridiculous.
Right. Sure.
Oh man, I guess the world we live in, though. Yeah,
you're right. That's the thing, and that too many times people take things that they're told and that they hear and even that they read at face value.
Yeah,
without questioning.
Oh, sure.
He said it or she said it, so it's got to be true. It's got to be accurate. So I'm gonna embrace it and run with it.
Well, you know why people do that. That's what we've been taught to do. We were taught for 12 years straight, 13 years straight in school to do that. Read the book, learn it. Read the book, learn it. We've been, for lack of a better term, indoctrinated to function that way. Our brains to function that way. We've had very little ability to exercise critical thinking. Even students who are in more accelerated classes or on a track for like college prep sort of stuff, like even in those courses very little critical thinking outside of narrow band of, well, you should think this, and then you should think this, and then you should think this. I don't want to divert too much on this topic, but I just remembering when I was really getting into critique of literature in high school, and you'd have to read something and write an essay on it, and it was like talking about interpreting what the author meant. It always struck me as so weird. It's like, how do you know that's what the author meant? Like, why? I mean, you can give a reason. You can say, it appears that or an interpretation of this could be, and here's the reason for my interpretation of it. But it was never couched that way. It was never couched that way. It was for determining what the author actually meant. And to me, that, again, is not trying to actually teach critical thinking. It's trying to teach a mouse how to run a maze. Right? And where it looks like there's a lot of action going on, but he's going the same way, and he's always going to end up in the same place. And so it's action for almost nothing. Let's just take the maze out of the way and go straight to the goal, right? That's really what, to me, it always felt like.
Right. And the sad part is that there's a great deal of the populace that's the only way they know to think.
Sure.
Right? And when you challenge it, their immediate response is to dig their heels in and defend, without rationale, but with emotion. Again, we go back to the thing about emotion, the point of emotion. And I think you and I both will agree that we fancy ourselves to be, contrarian in some respects, critical thinkers. Oh, yeah. We don't take things at face value. Why? Right? The 7 whys. Why? I mean, to get to the core of something, and but I think that there's value in that, right? Because if you don't know why you think and believe what you think and believe, do you really think and believe it?
Sure.
Or are you just parroting something?
You're programmed at that point, right? You're just programmed,
right? And my fear is that we have a lot of people in our country and in the world today that live that way. They're waiting for the voice that they can hear that they'll just go after, right? They'll go, they trigger and they'll follow that without really understanding why. Again, I don't want to open this can of worms, but it's a can that needs to be open at some point in time, and that is the generational differences in and it's always existed, but I think it's particularly acute right now. The generational differences in interpretation of government, of rights, of societal norms. I'm trying to avoid the whole political, liberal and left and right, and liberal and conservative.
Why avoid it? I mean, those are terms that are used, and I mean, if you just want to try to have a rational discussion about it, it doesn't mean you have to vilify either position. You can describe your thoughts on it and your perspective on it.
Right. And my intention, I guess I'm doing the counter of trying to not say the trigger words, right? The words that trigger people to immediately start emotional reacting.
I hear you.
It doesn't do anything. It happens anyway. Right?
Right. You're going to intimate it if you don't outright say it. So you might as well be as clear as you can with the things that you're trying to say.
That's right. And so I think that there's this whole fear. And especially on the extremes of the spectrums, whatever the spectrum is, political or socioeconomic or social norms or whatever, the extremes are certainly susceptible to that, but they tend to probably know more clearly why they believe what they believe. It's those that are more toward the central, the ones that they would prefer to avoid the challenge and the conflict. And I don't mean conflict in a constructive way. I don't mean conflict in a negative, harmful way. But the conflict and the debate about the truths and the realities and the facts of whatever the situation one would find himself in, and kind of going down that path. People just avoid that because they don't want to. Because they don't feel strongly about their perspective.
Well, it's the principles. It's generally the lack of guiding principles, and I don't mean that. Again, I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's just people haven't analyzed their own perspectives, thought processes, biases, etc., to try to understand what do they fundamentally believe about something, right? That, I personally have a fundamental principle that it's what you said earlier. My right to throw a punch ends at your face. I think that's a little harsh of a phrasing, because I think
Sure.
that there could be some threat implied at me throwing a punch at your
That's right.
face, and
That's
you
right.
don't have the right to threaten me. But I mean, putting that aside, I mean, pretty much, I do believe fully that as long as someone's actions do not harm another, they should be able to do whatever action that they want to do, even actions that other people would find objectionable. You may not like it. You can absolutely use persuasion to try to get them out of that perspective, or out of that behavior, out of that action. But they have that fundamental right to do that as long as they are harming no others. So that, to me, that's a real guiding principle. But I think some people are whatever their guiding principles are something that's a little less concrete than that, like whatever's expedient, whatever is most beneficial in the short term, things like that. They don't necessarily think about that as their principle. They just act that way, right? So their principles aren't a basis. Their principles get abstracted from their behavior.
So let me ask you a question. How many crumbs do you think we drop tonight that will present themselves in sessions in the future? I mean, I can think of at least 4, 5, 6.
I'm sure, yeah, half dozen. I'm sure. I've recorded 2 here on our notes page, so
Right.
we definitely got. I would 4, 5, 6. Yeah, for sure.
I think the concept that we've are talking about here, about these are basic day-to-day things, and some people don't believe the things we've talked about here tonight or day-to-day matter in the day-to-day, but they do.
Oh yeah,
They absolutely do,
sure.
and they are the kinds of things that permit people to not think they matter from time to time.
It's the things that matter most. I think it was Jordan Peterson who said something along the lines of, you don't think about the things that you do every day, like brush your teeth, etc. And so because of that, we generally take them as being not very important. But that's the wrong way. Those are the most important things, the things that you do every day, that you do without thinking, that are routine and habitualized. Those are the most important things, and that's why you habitualize them, is so that you don't have to remember to do them, because they are so important.
Right. Right. All right. I think I'm spent for this round. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good. We should probably wrap it up here. We've definitely, like you said, we've got quite a few topics for the future. So, Doyle, it's been a pleasure talking with you as always.
Same here.
And I definitely look forward to our next conversation.
Same here.
All
Have
right.
a good one, man.
Take care.
Till next time.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.